One of the most surprising announcements to come out of Apple's peak performance event last week has to be the new iPad Air updated to have the M1 chip. This thing is so insanely powerful and coming in at such a decent price that it begs the question, why would you want to buy the iPad Pro? Well, let's find out. If you're familiar with the iPad Air from 2020, then you will notice that physically, there is no difference between this year's model and that one. All the differences can be seen on the inside. It has the same 1640 by 2360 500 nit liquid retina display, the same 12 megapixel selfie camera capable of 1080p, and of course the USB-C port, which now has been upgraded to be 2 times faster than the previous generation. So the biggest difference is, and you've guessed it, the M1 chip, which along with it brings 8 gigabytes of RAM to the iPad Air, meaning you can multitask a bunch of apps and not see any slowdown. One of the key features that the M1 brings is center stage. This is a feature that we saw last year on the iPad Pro and then again a little bit later with the iPad Mini, which it uses the ultra-wide front-facing camera along with machine learning technology to recognize a user and keep them in the center of the frame during FaceTime calls. And it works so well. One of the tricks it's doing, aside from the super smooth panning and tilting, is real-time distortion removal to keep your proportions looking normal no matter where you stand. If we flick over to the camera app and open up the ultra-wide, you'll see the distortion around the corners of the frame is pretty intense, and center stage just gets rid of that. Now, one of the things I really would have loved to have seen in this iteration is the selfie camera moved to favor landscape mode. Seeing as the iPad Air still fits perfectly in the Magic Keyboard case, it makes no sense to keep it where it is. Samsung recently moved the selfie camera location on their latest tab line, and I really hope we see Apple do it in the future too. Oh, and while we're at it, Apple, please give us Face ID in these tablets. They have the M1 chip now. Touch ID is old news. When it comes to performance, this thing just soars, as you can imagine, especially in comparison to the 8th generation iPad that I use personally. I know its performance was effortless and nimble when it came to editing photos in Lightroom or drawing on 3D objects in Procreate, and I never once had an issue when it came to gaming on this either. Connecting to Sidecar was instantaneous with no apparent stuttering, and the new universal control feature worked exceptionally well when hardwired to the Mac, but it was a little slow when working wirelessly, but that could probably be fixed with a firmware update, so I'm not too worried. Whenever a new tablet comes out, be it the iPad Pro or the Air, the same question comes up again and again. Is this a laptop replacement? And you know, now more than ever, I really do think this is a valid question because we're at a point where these tablets literally have the same chipset as a laptop. Well, I was curious, so I priced out the iPad Air that we have here and the current M1 MacBook Air. The iPad has 256 gigabytes of storage, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and the M1 chip. And to make it fair, I added the Magic Keyboard in too. And it came out around $13.48 Canadian. Meanwhile, a MacBook Air with the exact same specs comes in at around $12.99 Canadian. So that's like a $50 difference. So sure, this costs the same as a laptop, but as good as iPad OS has gotten in recent years, it doesn't have the same infrastructure and file management system you'd find in a laptop. So while it may work for very casual users, I wouldn't recommend people chuck out their laptops in favor of an iPad just yet. So I asked at the start of this video, why would anyone buy an iPad Pro now? I mean, a similarly spec'd out 12.9-inch iPad Pro comes in at almost $2,000 Canadian, and that's including the Magic Keyboard. That's a pretty substantial price difference, but the iPad Pro does bring a few things to the table that the iPad Air lacks. The iPad Pro has both a 12 megapixel wide camera and a 10 megapixel ultra-wide camera on the back, as well as a LiDAR sensor. Its USB-C connector has support for Thunderbolt, meaning you can connect it to docking stations and run monitors, hard drives, and all sorts of other accessories. But the main thing is the display. The 12.9-inch iPad Pro has a mini LED Liquid Retina XDR display, which is quite a bit brighter and more contrasty and obviously bigger. Now, if you've heard all that and you thought, meh, well then congratulations, the iPad Air is for you. All the specs that I listed are more catered towards professionals anyway, so I suppose that justifies the name and the price. So that leads me to my next question. Who is this iPad for? Well, if you have the 2020 version of the iPad Air and you've been satisfied with the performance you've gotten out of it, then I'll be honest, I don't think you're gonna see that much of a difference with this upgrade. Really, this is a worthy upgrade if you're someone with an older iPad Air, like the 2019 iPad Air 3, or if you currently have an entry-level iPad and are looking for something with a bigger display, more powerful processor, and USB-C port. So, in all, there aren't really many big changes or surprises. The 2020 iPad Air is a fantastic tablet, and this version is just like that, but a little bit better. Is it a full laptop replacement? Not quite. But if you're interested in finding out how you can run your iOS apps and iPadOS apps on your MacBook, then check out this video we did right here. My name's Robin, thank you so much for checking this video out. And if you enjoyed it, give it a like and consider subscribing.